Baruuk is the reluctant warrior, the pacifist, the monk of Warframe. He is also Warframe's Bruce Banner, Warframe's the Hulk, in that his entire gameplay loop revolves around the idea of, don't make me angry, you wouldn't like me when I'm angry. The way he does this is by use of a resource that is unique to Baruuk. Baruuk has a resource called Restraint. Restraint is a meter that he has, a gauge, that unlike other Warframes that have meters that need to be filled up, Baruuk has a meter that needs to be depleted. He has to erode his own restraint and become angry before he can activate his most powerful ability, his exalted weapon, his number 4 ability, the Desert Wind, as they are called, his punch fists. His other 3 abilities is what he uses to erode his restraint. Now I will start this video by stating plainly that Baruuk is the best melee Warframe in the entire game. And it's not even close. To explain this, I have to start out by showing off Baruuk's tankiness. Baruuk has a passive that gives him up to 50% damage reduction if he completely erodes his restraint. Baruuk has his number 3 ability that can give him up to 90% damage reduction. Baruuk has his number 4 ability that gives him an additional 40% damage reduction while it's active. So that's 90% plus 40% plus another 50% on top of that, giving Baruuk effectively 99.7% damage reduction without any additions whatsoever. This is further upgraded a little bit by his armor value, not by a lot, but by a little bit. And you can add adaptation on top of that to give him an additional 90% damage reduction on top of that. So, in actuality, his damage reduction is closer to 99.9%, which means he is functionally unkillable. What that means for modding is that you don't have to give him any more armor, any more shields, any more health. You can just ignore all of that when modding Baruuk, because the damage reduction he gets from his abilities is more than enough to where you simply effectively cannot die. You just can't. Did I mention that his number 1 ability gives him an additional layer of damage reduction, making all incoming projectiles and melee attacks simply miss him so long as he doesn't attack. It's like he doesn't even need this. He just does not even need this. He's already unkillable, but he has this as well on top. He can also sleep enemies around him so that they just go have a nice little nap and then they can't shoot him as well. He doesn't even need this for a defensive ability, but he has it on top as well. In short, he cannot die. He simply cannot die. Oh, and by the way, his number 3 ability also helps allies. Any allies that are close to him gain a measure of damage reduction as well from him shooting off little daggers that attach themselves to allies, providing, in theory, if you have enough power strength, up to 90% damage reduction on them as well. Or 50% damage reduction on defense targets. So, just having a Baruuk in the team means that suddenly everyone on the team is a tank. Ain't that just swell? But the star of the show is, in fact, his punch fists, the Desert Wind, that he can activate once he has eroded his restraint. Just like with Excalibur's Exalted Blade, this is a ranged Exalted Melee. It fires off waves of energy that hit enemies decently far away for a metric ton of damage. The star of the show is an augment mod for his number 4 ability, Reactive Storm. It gives Desert Wind an additional 250% status chance, which is very nice, but more importantly, it makes Desert Wind change its damage type to match enemy weaknesses. What that means is, His punch fists are always going to hit enemies where it hurts the most. If they are weak to cold damage, it will hit them for cold damage. If they are weak to corrosive damage, it will hit them for corrosive damage. It will always hit at peak efficiency. This makes Desert Wind the by far best exalted melee weapon in the entire game. Arguably the best melee weapon in the entire game. So what we are left with in total is a Warframe that can't die and that can just break enemies in half up to levels of thousands. The damage numbers are just so insane that he can punch through steel walls. So the damage is there, and the protection is there, and the support is there. He is very much a complete package Warframe, and the only thing holding him back really was that he was very hard to farm for previously. You had to reach the highest rank in Solaris United, the faction on Venus, then accessing another faction after that called Vox Solaris, and there is where you could farm for Baruuk while leveling up in that faction. So Baruuk is actually one of those Warframes, like for example Korra as well, where it's probably easier to farm for his prime than it is to farm for the base version. Since his prime just came out, that means a lot of people are now gonna start trying out Baruuk and realizing for themselves just how insanely powerful he is. Now we're going to take a look at how to build Baruuk, and there are actually quite a lot of things to cover here, because unfortunately there are some interactions with his melee weapon that are a little bit bugged and that you have to build around. So if we go to Baruuk himself, we will see that I am running a mod called Melee Guidance, where I am reducing my own combo duration. I will just briefly touch on this. I made a different video talking more in depth about this bug regarding his melee weapons and how it works, how you can get around it. Everything you need to know, I will link to that video in the description of this video so that you can understand that. What this is about is that you want to get the set bonus from the Gladiator mod set to apply to his exalted melee weapon. The way to do that is by only building combo on your normal melee weapon, and then, through the use of Melee Guidance, giving your Desert Wind negative combo duration so that your Desert Wind cannot build combo. That way you can keep your normal melee weapon at a maximum combo so that you can get the Gladiator mod set bonus on your Desert Wind so that you can punch even harder. Beyond that, Baruuk does not have status immunity, which means that he can be affected by things like knockdowns, which means that you should run primed sure-footed in your aura mod slot. If you don't have primed sure-footed, there are other mods like Constitution or Handspring that can let you recover from knockdowns more quickly. You don't really have to worry about status effects killing you because he has such amazing damage reduction, but knockdowns are annoying and you don't want to spend any more time than necessary on your butt. Obviously we have to run Reactive Storm, and after that it's just a case of honestly ramping up your ability strength pretty much as you can. So you want to run Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude and Umbral Intensify to really boost up that ability strength. That is because his number 3 and his number 4 ability both benefit greatly from ability strength. I am running Fleeting Expertise to offset some of the negative efficiency that you get for running Blind Rage. You don't want the efficiency to go too low, because pretty often you want to recast your number 3 and very often you want to spam your number 2. Archon continuity is just a little bit of a bonus that sometimes when I do toxin status with Desert Wind, now I will also do corrosive status. Otherwise, just like you can just run primed continuity as well. It really won't matter in the slightest. Important to note, most Baruuk builds that you will see other guides for, they will forgo this entirely. They will put duration down here. Most people who play Baruuk, they will put duration at almost 0. The reason for this is because his number 3 and his number 4 abilities, they are not affected by duration in the slightest, and his number 2 ability actually benefits from having a low duration. Yes, you can sleep enemies with his number 2, so if you have really low duration, they're only gonna be asleep for 2.5 seconds, which is barely nothing. But people don't use this ability for sleeping enemies. People use this ability simply for casting it on a bunch of enemies to erode restraint so that you can activate your number 4. And this ability has a bit of a cooldown before you can recast it. So if you run at almost 0 duration, then that cooldown is 0.63 seconds, which is almost nothing. If you do have more duration on your build, then you can only recast this ability once every 3.37 seconds. Now, I find that you usually don't need to cast it more often than 3.37 seconds anyway. And if you want to use the Helminth system to improve your build somehow, then typically you are going to want a bit of duration, because if you have this low duration, then you do become a little bit limited in what Helminth abilities that you can use to improve Baruuk. You can only run other Helminth abilities that basically do not care about duration whatsoever, and there are a couple of those, and we're going to talk about those. But most Helminth abilities are probably going to want you to have at least a little bit of duration on your build. Rounding it out, we have a bit of a flex spot here. I've thrown in stretch for a bit more range, so that I can hit more enemies at the same time with lull. If you don't, for example, have arcane energize, it might be more pertinent to instead use something like streamline to increase your efficiency, make your abilities cheaper to cast. Baruuk does have a very high base energy pool at 300. It's one of the highest out of any Warframe. So you do have a lot of energy to play around with, but a bit more efficiency can be nice if you don't have something like Arcane Energize to compensate for that. As for how you build your primary weapon and your secondary weapon, that is completely irrelevant because you're not gonna be using them. Maybe you want something like an epitaph to use as a status primer. You can also use a Cedo as a status primer, because you can fire them while you have your Desert Wind active, which is nice. But other than that, you're just gonna be walking around and punching with your punch fists. There are some guides out there that recommend you to use primary dexterity and secondary dexterity in the arcane slot, because that gives you more combo duration. Those are builds that are focused around building all of your combo with Desert Wind and avoiding building combo with your normal melee weapon, as a different way of getting around the stack decay bug for the Gladiator mod set. But since this build is going to run with the negative combo duration for his Desert Wind, we actually don't want to run primary and secondary dexterity. As for your so-called stat stick, basically you just want the Gladiator mods in there, you want things that will increase combo duration and combo count chance, attack speed so that you can build up combo faster, and Shattering Impact, giving you the ability to momentarily turn off your Desert Wind so that you can strip a particularly tanky enemy of armor and then switch it back on. Things like high-level Acolytes, Demolishers, and the like. As for the Desert Wind itself, you want to stack a bunch of elemental damage in here, and it doesn't really matter which ones you stack, because his augment makes it so that you're not actually going to be punching for viral damage, as I've built here. You're going to be punching for whatever your opponent is most weak against. You want some attack speed, you want some crit damage. Note that the Desert Wind itself does not get the mod set bonus from the Gladiator mod set directly. You're getting the mod set bonus from the normal melee weapon, but you do get the increased crit damage from the Gladiator mod itself, even on the Desert Wind. Other than that, I'm running Primed Pressure Point and Sacrificial Steel. If you want to, you're gonna need to, because the mod capacity, you can put an Umbra Forma into this weapon so that you can run Sacrificial Steel and Sacrificial Pressure at the same time for a bigger buff to crit chance and the same melee damage. Note that the Desert Wind cannot use Condition Overload. Condition Overload does not work on the Desert Wind, and it cannot equip the Acolyte mods, as they're called, the Blood Rush and Weeping Wounds mods. So you can just skip those entirely. And finally, the final slot is honestly a flex slot. There is nothing that you really particularly need in this final slot. Once you have these 7 mods, this one doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter all that much what you put here. So it's an excellent spot to put a primed mod if you want. It's also not wrong to just increase your elemental damage even more. Throw something like, I don't know, here, in there, put more elemental damage. You can take one of the ones that doesn't give more status chance as well. Something like Fever Strike, Molten Impact. That's fine to just increase just your base elemental damage. Hell, you might even want to put in another one of the Gladiator mods, something like Gladiator Vice, to give yourself even more attack speed, if that's your fancy. Since you can use this one in conjunction with Berserker Fury. The only thing that you can't put in is things that give you combo or increases combo duration, and that is actively going to hurt you. Also worth noting is that there's no such thing as Desert Wind Rivens. They do not exist. So, unfortunately, that would have been the perfect space to put a Riven mod if that was a thing, but it's not. You can, of course, also build the Desert Wind for heavy attacks, which is excellent for single target damage, in which case Killing Blow could also be an alternative to just slot right in here. Finally, when it comes to Archon shards, it's red all the way, and it's crit damage, crit damage, crit damage, crit damage, crit damage all the way. This thing crits a lot. With all of these bonuses, with the bonus from Organ Shatter and Gladiator Might, we are getting up to a 7.5 times crit multiplier. And with the bonus from the Gladiator mod set, we're gonna be up to a bonus of like 360% extra crit chance. So we definitely want our crits to do as much damage as absolutely possible. If you don't have, for example, Blind Rage, Transient Fortitude, or a maxed out Umbral Intensify, maybe you need to ramp up your ability strength a bit more. Note that the Desolate Hands, it caps damage reduction at 90, which it does when you have 9 daggers orbiting around you, which means technically you only need to be able to summon 9 daggers. If you also want to be able to give your allies 90% damage reduction, then you need twice. You'd need 18 charges to be able to do that. So long as your Desolate Hand can get up to 18 charges, you're pretty much good. Having more charges simply means less times that you have to recast the ability to make sure that you're always at least 9 daggers and at least 90% damage reduction. So having more ability strength means you have to cast this less often, which means less energy drain. In that case, you can instead use red Archon shards to simply increase your ability strength to get it up to an appropriate number. But having something higher than this, it's like honestly not needed. This is about as high as you want to go. So I don't feel like I need to have more ability strength with my Archon shards, which is why I instead put everything in crit damage. Finally, when it comes to focus school, this one is important since you have to have your so-called stat stick at maximum combo at all times. We have to run Naramon with Power Spike. That means that instead of depleting completely, your combo counter is only going to deplete a little bit. That means you can put your Venka Prime, or whichever melee weapon you choose to use as your stat stick, you can put it up to 12 combo, just leave it there. 2 or 3 minutes later, it's going to be down to 11 or 10 combo. Then you just deactivate your Desert Wind for a couple of seconds, hit a couple of enemies, get back up to 12 combo, and then reactivate your Desert Wind, and just keep on punching. Finally, when it comes to Helminth options, we actually have quite a lot of options for Baruuk. The reason for this is because Baruuk's number 1 ability is such a good flex spot. You can use his number 1 ability to erode restraint, but you can also use his number 2 ability and his number 3 ability to do the same thing. The extra layer of protection that his number 1 ability gives is also not particularly relevant because he already has 99.9% damage reduction. It also requires a bit of a different build. It wants duration, while his other abilities don't want duration. etc, etc. So most people gravitate toward removing his number 1 ability and putting something else in there. If you look at abilities that don't concern themselves one bit with ability duration, if you're gonna go for the 13% duration builds, then some common options are grouping abilities, like for example larva or pull, or armor stripping abilities, like pillage, that you can also use to replenish your own shields. Pillage, in fact, benefits from negative duration. It means the pulse completes faster, which allows for faster recast. You get the shields back faster. Good for things like shield gating. And with the high amount of ability strength Baruuk has, very good for stripping armor and shields from enemies. Note that his Desert Wind, it hits so goddamn hard that until you get up to levels of 1,000, 2,000, we're talking enemy start level 2,000. Up until that point, you barely even need armor stripping, because you hit so hard that you just kill enemies anyway. But if you do want to go up against the most extreme high-level enemies there are in the game, then this is a decent option. The thing about Baruuk, though, is that his number 2, 3, and 4 abilities are such a complete kit. That's basically all you actually need. You don't need anything else. So you can just put something fun in his number 1 slot instead. Now, since Baruuk is going with the whole Shaolin monk theme, why not go the Avatar the Last Airbender route? Because you can make him a firebender. You can make him an earthbender. You can make him a waterbender. All of that cool stuff. So, unfortunately, waterbending is gonna be the weakest version of him. You do have aqua blades for that, so you can get these spinning blades of water around you. The problem with Baruuk is that he's so good at killing things that most enemies are just never ever going to get close to you. So, you can't really... It looks cool, but it's not gonna do much. The other water ability is Tempest Barrage that you get from Hydroid, and this ability is so laughably bad that no one would ever use it for anything. Now, airbending is in a better spot. That means we can use Airburst from Zephyr, which is a fantastic grouping ability to pull enemies together so that you have an easier time getting close to them, smacking them around, and building combo. It's also just good for grouping them up so that you can punch them with your punch fists and kill them. Firebending is in an even better spot. You either have Fire Blast, which does not care about duration, so you can use this together with a low duration build to just shoot off a blast of fire in all directions, hit enemies for a decent amount of damage, and most importantly also stripping their armor. You can also, if you do have a bit of duration in your build, go for Firewalker. So you simply run around and leave a trail of fire in your wake that damages enemies and cleansing allies. What that means, cleansing allies, is that it makes you status immune while you're doing this. Which means that you do not need to run primed sure-footed in your Exilus mod slot. Maybe you don't have primed sure-footed. Or maybe you simply don't want to put that much Forma into Baruuk. What do I know? This is a way of achieving status immunity so you can't go down from knockdowns, while also, you know, being a firebender. And finally, my favorite in this context is actually earthbending with Petrify. Petrify allows you to simply petrify enemies, turn them to stone, and then when you punch them, they shatter into a million pieces. Now, this has two benefits. Benefit number one is that it allows you to equip the Ore Gaze augment mod, which means that enemies drop more loot when you kill them. Ore Gaze scales with ability strength, so a Warframe like Baruuk that has a very high amount of ability strength can make excellent use of this to effectively turn himself into a loot frame. First you petrify enemies, then you smash them, and you get more loot. Second, Petrify actually has an innate little bonus that it doesn't say outright on the ability screen, in that it enhances enemies' vulnerabilities. If you petrify an enemy, whatever they are strong against, they become less strong against. Whatever they are weak against, they become more weak against. So, since his punch fists already attack enemies for what they're weak against, If you first petrify them, they're gonna be even more weak to it. So it actually represents a decent damage increase as well. But again, like I'm sounding like a broken record here, Baruuk hits so goddamn hard without any help that you're not gonna need Petrify to kill enemies until you get up to very, very high levels. Your punch fists are gonna be just fine for killing anything at all up to levels of hundreds, thousands, you know. When we get up to level 2000, level 3000 enemies, then we're talking. Then it might be worth it to do stuff like this. Otherwise, just do it for fun and maybe for more loot. Other than that, it's like just, you know, Helminth abilities that increase your survivability or whatever, like Gloom. Completely useless, completely pointless on Baruuk. Baruuk is already one of the tankiest Warframes in the entire game. He can't die. So don't need to worry about that. And if you want to be boring, there's obviously always things like Roar. There's always things like Eclipse if you want to like increase your damage, but you don't need to. This is like, why would you put Eclipse on Baruuk? He already has more damage than anyone else, and he already has more damage reduction than anyone else. This just like, it does nothing for him. Take it from me, take something fun instead when you're gonna put Helminth stuff on Baruuk. When it comes to just efficiency and just making him hit harder or whatever you can come up with, it's just not needed. He has already broken through his limiter, okay? Like the One Punch Man style. That's it, people. That's the breakdown. That is Baruuk, hands down, the best melee frame in the entire game. Straight up. There is no competition. Not Excalibur. Not Valkyr, not Wukong, not anything. No other melee frame comes close to Baruuk. He is the best. If you like playing melee frames, there's literally nothing better you could be playing. If you don't like playing melee frames, then Baruuk is probably not going to be for you, because he is very straightforward in that. His entire kit is built around his exalted weapon. If you don't like melee frames and you want to shoot guns, then unfortunately, Baruuk is not going to be the Warframe for you. But if you do like playing melee frames, and you do like being immortal, you do like doing millions of damage, and you do like supporting all of your teammates as well by giving everyone else damage reduction, then I do recommend playing the Reluctant Warrior, because he's super cool and he's super badass. That's the video, people. Thank you for listening. And as always, tune in again tomorrow for something completely different.